Welcome to the Nectar podcast, discussing the things we think about Hull City AFC.
Welcome along to the Nectar podcast. It feels like forever since we last spoke to you. Les and Andy are here, as you can see. Before we start, we would like to once again extend our sympathy to the family of the former Hull City winger Charlie Crickmore, who of course later after his football career finished came back to Hull to become a very popular figure in local football as a referee. And even though he only played for Hull City until he was 19 years old, he was fondly remembered by those who watched him play and certainly by his teammates and those who came across him afterwards. So from all three of us, our condolences to Charlie Crickmore's family. Here we are then. As I said, it feels like forever because we have actually got two games to talk about, because we didn't talk about the game against Sheffield United.
Let's never talk about it.
The 1-0 defeat before the international break. But Les has, not that I had any thunder to begin with, but Les has stolen the minuscule, almost invisible thunder that I was purveying until that point, which is we're going to ignore it completely. Having said that, the game on Saturday felt like it was one worth ignoring as well, just generally a low-quality occasion. And Les, a big opportunity missed, really, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was immensely frustrating. It was an afternoon that had its charms in places, even though it was there was more heat than light, I think, in terms of technical ability. The frustrating thing is, Preston, to me, looked a poor side, and they even looked a poor side as they had City on the ropes for like the first 15 or 20 minutes. They were really pegging City back, and you just thought, oh my word, are we going to get a shoeing by Preston? But sort of City turned the tide and actually started to get on top, and then started like a process of, I don't know, trying to hit the bar, the woodwork at every opportunity. If Jimmy Hill had done one of his schemes where if you hit the bar you get 8 points, City would probably be top of the league after that game. But what was troubling was we pulled the game back. City started being the better team, even if they didn't always have the Tigers' share of possession. But during our periods of dominance, we just couldn't get a breakthrough. And then City, I wouldn't say we had a stroke of luck, because it was definitely a penalty. Martin was definitely hauled down. You could see the clear definition of the pull. So it was a penalty, but it felt like almost like a stroke of luck, given the fact that City looked like they couldn't score from open play. And the troubling thing is then they couldn't even hang on to that. 5 minutes of normal time, maybe 3 or 4. I think maybe there might have been a bit longer than that in added time, but we couldn't hang on to it. And you came out of the ground thinking, well, Preston looked really poor, and their fans were delighted with a 1-1 draw with City. They were practically wanking each other off as they were leaving the ground. They were that ecstatic about a 1-1 draw against the bottom side. And you just come away thinking, well, when are we next going to win if we can't beat them at home? And that, just felt troubling, even if there were some occasional good signs in the game.
Is it not a decidedly typical City thing to do, along with the many other decidedly typical City things that we've witnessed and experienced over the years, to go ahead, irrespective of whether it was deserved or not, so late on in the game, and then not be able to hold on for what short period there was left. I mean, City had managed to go 85 minutes without really being threatened that much by Preston North End, but somehow couldn't go a remaining 5 minutes of normal time plus 3 minutes of injury time that obviously turned into 6 after the goal, without conceding. It's a ridiculous situation whereby you get that late goal, and that's supposed to be it. Professional players then shut up shop, as the phrase goes, and City couldn't.
Well, the task ahead of City was scarcely a monumentally difficult one, was it? It was basically a case of play for 8 minutes without conceding and you win, and that oughtn't be beyond the wit even of this very, very weak City side. And the fact that we couldn't do it, it's certainly typical City in terms of this City side that we see, that it's so very poor, and we just cannot keep clean sheets, can we? I think we've kept 1 all season. It means we're having to score twice to win, and we're not scoring even a goal a game at the moment, so it certainly explains why we've only won twice all season. But how many more opportunities are we going to get that are better to get a win than being at home to Preston, winning with 5 minutes left? That really is the kind of opportunity that you have to take. even if you judge the game beforehand and say this is probably a must-win game, but then to be in that very strong position and not see it through, I can't really get over that. I can't really forgive that. I can't understand that a team that is capable of doing that is then somehow going to stay up.
In the period between City scoring and Preston scoring, did you think Preston would probably still come back into the game, or did you, whether it's sort of just optimistically or even naively, assume that the game was over and City would be able to close it out, even a limited City side like this?
No, I mean, and normally my sanity-preserving instincts, my psyche, does sort of think, well, typical City will sort this out, so don't get your hopes up. No, at this point, I was like looking at the BBC Sport live table, revelling on the fact that we'd come out the relegation places, or it looked like we would. But yeah, then we knocked it up, and I just think you have to look at the substitutions. I thought substitutions were bizarre. Preston chucked 3 subs on, and sort of went, to have an equaliser, and City didn't react to it. So I mean, your first substitution was on 87 minutes. That was Campbell for Martin, so that's pretty much a like-for-like substitution. Dicko came on. Grzycki went off. That's not a substitution designed necessarily to hold the game. Dicko, is going to come on and plough his usual low furrow to it's decent, but it never seems to be effectual for City. But I don't think that's on him. And I thought that was a substitution that needed making 15 minutes earlier. Grzycki had a decent game, but by that point it was either a combination. He was knackered. The sugar high from his energy drink had run out, or he'd got bored by that point. Whatever, he was past his effective best.
I love the idea that a player gets substituted because they've got bored.
Yeah, maybe, and City sort of needed to hold it. And then
substitute the entire crowd in that case.
And then the next change was Stewart for Batty, which again was a like-for-like change. So granted, you may be replacing tired legs, but I think we sort of maybe needed a bit of a formation change at that point. We need something to maybe pack the midfield. And hold on to it.
But is there any evidence that the Stewart for Batty substitution, because obviously that came after they equalised, is there any evidence that was actually anything other than to stop Preston from going on to win the game?
Well, I say that's like for like, but that's very unfair on Batty, isn't it? Because I don't really know what's like Stewart. Maybe you could have brought a dish rag on instead. I don't know. And the thing is, this is why I lose. There was that period where we felt bad, that we a little bit bad. Yeah, I don't often feel that bad. That we'd sort of mocked Adkins mercilessly, sort of writ him off when he came. And there was that period where, we're doing okay, and you thought, oh, maybe there's something in it. This season he's sort of descended back into caricature, banging on about breakfasts and warm-ups. And you can sort of say there's a caveat. You can say there's a lot of mitigating circumstances for City being shit under Adkins. But you can't pin crap substitutions on Ehab. That was entirely down to Adkins, and I just thought he got all of the substitutions wrong. And perhaps more importantly, I thought the substitutions were at the wrong time. They needed to be made earlier to have had an impact, and that's squarely on the head coach.
A point has just been made on Periscope, Andy, though, that maybe this is just real cynicism from a City supporter, that even if Adkins had brought on defenders for the strikers, we probably still would have conceded.
Perfectly possible. There's always a goal against in the City side, isn't there? And we can't know that the substitutions are what cost us the game, but they still don't make sense, do they? They don't chime quite with the needs of the game at the time. And this is where we come back to it, isn't it? We all know that Adkins has been dealt a very poor hand, but I still think it needs playing better than he so often does. And making all them substitutions like that when he did, no, that's not how you do it at all. It strikes of not having a plan, and that's something that we've said a couple of times this season, isn't it? That we don't really know how we're wanting to go about things. It just, all right, we know we've got a poor side, a poor squad, but we're still very reactive. I always think it's not as though there's a plan before the game. There's a list of options that Phil Brom once talked quite persuasively about it, didn't he? He said that he had a plan for every occurrence. So if player X got sent off after 15 minutes, I knew what I was going to do. Now, Phil Brown is never one to downplay his own capacities, But yeah, it was probably true. I can't imagine he said it and it wasn't true. But I
The
can't
phrase
imagine
game, the phrase game plan was very much in Phil Brown's vocabulary in every preview interview he did and every post-match interview he did. So yeah, you're absolutely right. You would think that Phil Brown had something in mind for every possible eventuality, and also every improbable eventuality, like somebody being sent off after 15 minutes.
Well, it's your full-time job. You've got plenty of time to think about what you're going to do if this happens, and if not, you've got assistants and coaches to do that kind of thinking for you. I just don't think there's a plan. I really don't. I don't think there's a plan. I don't think there's a plan B. Obviously, if there's not even a bloody plan A, then we react and we meander and we guess and look at the state of the table.
It's not just the time of the game when Preston were able to equalise, Les. It's the manner of the goal as well.
Yeah, I mean that was really frustrating. And like I said, I didn't think it was necessarily inevitable. But the ball got played in from the flanks, and there was 3 players around the player that scored. Was it Moles? But none of them got in there to make a decisive challenge, and that was frustrating because I actually thought Jordi Device had a decent game. Certainly had one of his better games. Given some of his performances, you sort of wince when you see him, but I thought he had a decent game. I'm not pinning it all on him because there was 2 other City players around him. I'm just annoyed that collectively 3 players sort of triangulating their forward couldn't contrive to stop him getting a shot in. I attach no blame to Marshall whatsoever. Yeah, just massively frustrated. And I found myself that I can't bring myself to listen to Adkins speak post-match or pre-game. I can't bear it, and every now and again you read something he said because it gets done on Twitter, and that mostly how I sort of ingest my City news now. But it's just like, that stuff about I never get down. I have a shave every morning and I look in the mirror and I'm true to myself. I mean, the man is beyond clutching at straws now. He's built a house out of straw and he's constructed a straw family called Maud, Todd and Rod. He is Ned Flanders. He is Ned Adkins. Lee Freer said that on Twitter. I just thought he absolutely summarised him perfectly. This sort of baseless optimism bounding Ace Wellview. He's getting punched in the head and he would say, no need to flogging in the noggin. It's just everything isn't okie dokily, is it? We have come off the bottom, which I suppose we should be grateful for, but
well, you can still get relegated second bottom, unfortunately, as opposed to bottom. It's a hollow achievement to come off the bottom. City would have been, I think, 21st in the table if they'd held on for the win, because of course Preston are in that zone as well. The point for them keeps them out of the bottom 3. One last point about these late substitutions, and it is the lateness of them. So no substitutions had been made. City get the penalty and score, 85 minutes. Then Adkins decides to bring on Campbell. Then in injury time, bring on Dicko. Concedes the equaliser, brings on Stewart. If you're going to make substitutions that late, why make them at all? Because there's supposed to be this thing about disrupting the flow of the play for your opponent when you bring in a sub on. But, Preston would have been bringing subs on at the same time because they were now chasing the game. So they're going to disrupt their own flow by making their own subs. If Fraser Campbell, for example, has managed to make it to 87 minutes of the match, he's not going to be too knackered to make it to 96. And the same would apply. I know that Stewart got injured right at the end. Batty got injured right at the end, which is why Stewart came on. But even so, those first 2 substitutions, if you're going, it's not just that you're not really disrupting the flow of the play of your opposition when the opposition are bringing on their own subs to try and get something back. The referee is obliged to add on 30 seconds of extra injury time anyway for each substitution that was made. So whatever time you think you've wasted during the course of the substitution just gets played later on, surely. So it's a pointless exercise some of the time, isn't it? Especially when it's like for like. If you can observe a structural, formational, tactical alteration as a consequence directly of these substitutions, then there is something to comprehend. But this was not as such at all, was it?
No.
None of the type.
If you're going to do it, you presumably doing it to change the formation, perhaps to plug up the midfield, which is a sensible thing to do. I've even heard it speculated before that it is sometimes a good idea to, if you've only had one striker before, and you're holding on to the game. Bring 2 strikers on, fresh legs, give them something to really keep 3 or 4 men back for and prevent them overloading.
And run it into the channels.
I've heard the theory. I don't know if I buy it. I don't know if Adkins has ever even heard of it. So that's a moot point. But the only other argument for bringing on changes like that is fresh legs. But I don't know. It's just not how you do it, is it?
Fresh legs when you're already in added time. You know, it's...
Yeah.
Not really giving them a chance to get a feel for the game, are they? I just thought the changes needed to be made
either earlier or not at all.
In reaction to Preston making changes, you know, try and see what they're trying to do. But it's as if we're just like, whatever, we'll leave them to it. We don't need to adapt.
You see,
I think we did.
When you go 1-0 up so late on, this was one of Steve Bruce's few failings, but when you go 1-0 up so late on, or take the lead in a match so late on, if you're going to make late substitutions, it tends to be to try and protect that lead. Now, there's no evidence that if you're going to bring on Martin for Campbell and Dicko for Grzycki, then you are trying to protect your lead because you are not taking off an attacking player and bringing on a defensive player. You're taking off an attacking player and bringing on another one. They might be slightly fitter because they've not taken part in the game, but ultimately your formation hasn't changed and it's not giving your defence any extra help.
No, and it's a defence that needs a hell of a lot of help. It needs a deep lying midfield in front of it because we know it can't cope. We know it's no good, and he just cocked up, didn't he? In a season that is basically one massive disaster. It's just another small tale of poor decision making.
Somebody deep lying. It's Ehab. He's lying, but not very deep. It's the Amber Nectar podcast. You can get us via your preferred podcast provider. Remember, we have a YouTube page as well, so we are currently filming ourselves, which is streaming live on Periscope as we speak, and then if you absolutely definitely have to watch us in action as well as listen to us afterwards, if you're not joining us live, then you can do so via the Amber Nectar YouTube page. All the appropriate links you need are on our Twitter page or on the main Amber Nectar website. We've got 2 away games coming up. Wednesday night we play at Bristol City, and then on Saturday we go to Bolton. It's going to be the hardiest of Hull City souls that take themselves down to the southwest and to Ashton Gate. I've only ever been to Ashton Gate once, me. It is a ground I'd like to go to more often, man. It's just never
Well, that's good.
Yeah, I know. Andy's already brought the subject up. Can't be done, I'm afraid.
Okay.
I went the year that we got promoted and we lost there. It was the one game Michael Turner missed that season because he was suspended. I think that's when Neil Clement made his debut. It was when Backfink of Amber Nectar goosed Paul Duffin. That's the only time I've been to Ashton Gate. The Fixed Computer always throws up something like this for every team. It happens to southern teams having to go somewhere far-flung in the north in midweek as winter approaches. You have to go to Bristol City at some point in the season. They're doing well, which makes it even harder. But a Wednesday night in October when you're seriously not in form does not bode confidently for Nigel Adkins and his merry men, does it?
Well, it's just so easy to sort of play the game out in your own mind's eye and see City losing it cheaply.
And you think that will happen?
Yeah, I do.
See, Nigel Adkins has got to be careful because when we played the games against Leeds and Middlesbrough recently, Les, he talked about playing 2 games, and of course these were home games. We had the alleged home advantage for whatever that represents these days. We had 2 home games against the 2 best sides in the division according to the table at the time, and he made that point. Look, we've done all right because we were playing the top 2 sides. We recently played the bottom 2 sides and didn't do all right, but he didn't choose to mention that fact. He's got to be careful now. It is, but it does show, and you can obviously understand from his point of view the reasons not for doing so, but he can't then use the top 2 teams as an excuse for defeats when he can't also beat the bottom 2 teams either. So this is an opportunity that's slightly different because we've got Bristol City, who as we stand at 10th, they might be in a different position because there are games on Tuesday night by the time we go there. Then on Saturday we go to Bolton, who are in the bottom half but are decidedly better than they were last season when they stayed up on the last day, and of course were bottom 3 for an awfully long time.
But having said that, even last season, in a team where we seem to only do well against teams that began with B, and you know, we paggered Bolton earlier in the season because they were absolutely dreadful. We still went away and they beat us, and they're a better side this year than they were last. And as you mentioned, Bristol City are a decent team. You know, it can't last forever, this run. There's going to have to be a time where we beat a side regardless.
Why?
Of, yeah.
I'm not convinced. I think I'm actually on with Andy there. You know, it's hard to see. Yeah, City will probably win a couple of extremely sort of bland and featureless home games. But where do you see the next away win coming from? It certainly doesn't look like it's going to come at Bristol. Bolton,
League One.
Yeah, the FA Cup third round. Even that, it depends on whether it's what did you say? Salford City away. But you know, I mean, Bolton's a possibility. Obviously, they're both a possibility because football's a weird game, especially in the Championship. But you know, you put sort of common sense at the front of all of this, and it's just, I know we sound unduly negative, but the way the team is playing and the way the team is playing, the way the club is run, and the way, I was about to say, the way the league table simply never lies, means that we have got every right to feel negative about these two games coming up.
Yeah, sometimes the league table fibs if you've got games in hand, but I don't think it's lying at the moment. I'm just astounded that we're not currently the worst club in the division at the corner of the table. We'll scuff a win at some point, but whether we deserve it, I don't know whether I'm basing that on logic or just long-term probability. You know, if you've got a graph, the longer you go, you've got to get 3 points at some point. But I can't pick out when that's going to happen. Even looking at the league table, you look at teams who were weak and you think, oh, we could, maybe we won, and then you think maybe we'll play better against the bigger teams. Well, maybe that maybe the draw against Middlesbrough is the height of it, you know, our being up for a game against a decent team and getting something. But yeah, there don't appear to be any logic to it, and there's no logic to half the stuff the manager says, so it's pretty hard to divine where we think salvation's coming from, really.
I don't know whether there's a full programme of midweek Championship fixtures. I don't know if Ipswich are playing tomorrow, but of course if they are, then City could feasibly be bottom of the table again by the time they go to Bristol. And if the result is what I think most people would expect, and certainly would correspond with the odds that the bookies would offer for the game, City could still be bottom of the table by the time they go to Bolton at the weekend. And you know, even though we're still in a relatively early point of the season, it's 46 games. By the time we go to Bolton, we'll have played 14, so there's still plenty of time. But even so, there is that psychological thing going on about, you know, going to the bottom of the table, climbing off it again, albeit in not quite the circumstances you would hope for, only to find yourself back there again a week later.
Yeah, my guess is we'll probably end this week, we'll probably end the week bottom again.
There's something really psychologically damaging about being bottom during an international break, and it just means you feel bottom for a long time. You know, our attendances haven't been great this season, but I just wonder if that preyed on people's mind when they were deciding whether to go to the game or not. And it just felt. There's been a few games this season where you've gone to a game on a Saturday, like I will head down Chance Ave and then go down Walton Street, and you think, oh, it doesn't feel like a match day. What's going on? And it had that feeling again, but a little bit more. There was a few. It felt like there was a few less people there this time. I don't know whether that's true actually, because Preston didn't bring a big following in the manner that Leeds or Middlesbrough did. But just going on how it feels, and even when there's a game on and you're walking through West Park, it doesn't feel like a match day. It just feels people are milling around on a vaguely sunny day. It was seasonably warm on Saturday.
And there was a beans bus.
Indeed.
So
you two, what I'm enjoying here is that these two are now trying to talk as little as possible about actual football, and that's probably wise.
Have you watched the bastard football this season?
I have, the bastard football, as it's now known. I have, and of course, if you're not going to Bristol, you can now watch City via the red button if you have Sky, and one camera, one commentator, no replays. It's very basic, but then again, that's what you get for the red button, and at least it exists. But I found myself thinking, well, I'll probably catch up on Coronation Street instead. I don't know. No, of course, I'll watch it. But
try Killing Eve on the iPlayer. I think that's quite good.
I shall bear that in mind. if or when City are 3-0 down after 15 minutes, it may well be
should we review Doctor Who, maybe?
A reasonable alternative. I've just finished Alan Smith's autobiography, which is absolutely brilliant and worth reading. I don't really watch a lot of television, but I'm reading an awful lot of football books at the moment. We can talk about that instead, if you like. I've read Alan Smith, Peter Reid, and Carlton Palmer in the last 2 weeks, and they're all really, really good tomes. Might ghostwrite Nigel Adkins' autobiography one day. A close shave, it would be called. Who needs Mourinho? We've got our physio. I want to talk about the Bolton game this Saturday a little bit more, because they are 18th, and again, because there are midweek games ahead of us going over there at the weekend, we don't know quite. We're 7 points behind them at the moment. We might be slightly closer, we might be further away. We obviously don't know. But when you're in a situation like City are in at the moment, the manager, if he's got anything about him, Steve Bruce used to say he did this. You'd get the list of fixtures and you'd put a red mark or coloured mark next to the fixtures away from home that you have earmarked as priority. Bolton's going to be one of those, isn't it?
It's absolutely got to be, because they're one of the few teams in the division that's nearly as bad as we are. And for heaven's sake, we're already in a situation where we can't draw our way out of trouble. We're already well behind a point a game this season. If you carry it forward, I think we end up on something like 35 points based on what we're getting at the moment, which is stone cold last at the end of the season. So we do need to get some wins, and I'm not saying Bolton's a great chance to get one of those wins, because the harsh fact is they're probably better than us. They're already 7 points better off than us this season. That is a margin big enough to suggest that it's not a fluke. But we have got to get some wins. The game after Bolton at home is frankly terrifying. So I think
I saw the advert for that leaving the ground. I'm just thinking, my word, they're going to stab us in the bottom.
Well, West Brom are going along at 31 goals already this season. They must be looking at our defence and thinking, oh, fantastic goal bonuses for everybody except the keeper here this week. And
Have you noticed, by the way, I've just realised this, I'm sure other people have noticed, it's sort of something that Jim McVie will have known before he even got home from the game on Saturday, but City are only above Ipswich because we've beaten them this season, because the points are the same, the goal difference is the same, the goals for are the same, and the goals against are the same. So presumably we're now separated from Ipswich because we've actually played them and beaten them this season, and that's the only reason we're above them. So it goes back to that 1984 season where City didn't go up on the strength of one goal scored with Sheffield United and that game against Burnley on the last day of the season. But yeah, so just for the fact that because of an earlier fixture, we are not bottom of the table. So to all intents and purposes, we are joint bottom. We are not 23rd, because you can usually differentiate either, if not on points, then obviously on goal difference or even on goals for or against. We can't even do that. We've also got jointly with Ipswich the second worst goal difference in the division. Only Rotherham have got a worse goal difference than us, and you feel like that's not going to last forever either. Things are just going to dovetail even more, aren't they?
I only see it getting worse.
Gloomcast.
We are, but what are the Periscope audience saying? Are they all gloomy as well, or are there loads of people on there telling us to buck our ideas up and back the team?
They're watching Killing Eve or whatever it was.
Coronation Street's on.
I watched The Cry, the end of The Cry over the weekend, which was about a dead baby.
Any good?
Well, still better than City.
Anyway,
Blimey.
Delightful. I'm conscious that we're 27 minutes into the podcast and we've got nothing else regarding City
Let's talk about happy times
to
then.
really talk about. Well, I just want to mention congratulations to Leeds United fans who managed to beat each other up at the weekend. You are still fourth, incidentally, and only 2 points off the lead of the Championship table. You two have both gone on record on this podcast and said you think that Leeds might hang on and do it this season, and I said I don't think they would. Now, of course, it might still come back to life for Leeds United this season, but it would be very, very funny if their decline had already started, wouldn't it?
Oh, hilarious. You see that video of the dweeb dressed up as Jimmy Savile and he was on the back of somebody and they're all like giving him adulation. I mean, what a seriously deranged fan base they are. It's like psychopaths, Leeds fans.
I don't really get how declaring yourself to be pro-paedophile is a statement that you really want to get yourselves behind, but
Leeds United.
Champions, etc.
I'm sorry. That might actually have got me for the rest of the podcast. Thank you, Les.
It's all good.
All right then. Let's talk about good stuff.
Yeah.
From 10 years ago. Fortunately for us, because we've just had the international break, 10 years ago, over the same period, there was an international break. So we haven't got a massive sort of backlog through history to go through now that we've actually deemed to come back and do a podcast for you. There are 2 games from this week, 10 years ago, that we can talk about. The first one, this, of course, is our first Premier League season, the season 08-09, and City have started it astonishingly with just 1 defeat, and among the victories, away at Arsenal and away at Tottenham. Following the Tottenham game, there was an international break. We come back. I think this is the international break where Michael Turner was put on standby as well. And the rumours had started about his possible elevation to Fabio Capello's England squad, which, of course, never quite happened. And when we come back, he's the scorer of the only goal in a 1-0 win over West Ham United. And if you can have an ordinary Premier League victory, given that we were very, very much still the new kids on the block in the Premier League, this was it really. And most victories at home against pretty much anybody were going to be ordinary compared to beating, not so much Tottenham at that stage because they were bottom of the table and awful, but certainly beating Arsenal only 3 weeks before. But beating West Ham 1-0 in the Premier League was still a mighty fine thing to do, wasn't it?
Yeah, we were still very much at the rubbing our eyes in disbelief stage of the whole process. And, I mean, it very much looked like a workaday kind of routine win. The weird thing was it almost did feel like a routine win, as though City was slightly the better side, made it count. Granted, they scored from a set piece, but then held it out like a real Premier League team would do. And that was the most satisfying thing, that it wasn't a sort of streaky victory, it wasn't a fluke, or it wasn't something that you can't repeat like a win at Arsenal. This was the kind of regular bread and butter 3 points that the real big boys in the Premier League do. And that was the most satisfying thing about it.
I mean, there was internationals ahoy in the West Ham United side. You know, England internationals: Robert Green, Matthew Upson, Scott Parker, Carlton Cole. I think he won 1 cap for England, didn't he? Plus they had Craig Bellamy in the side, a player I've always disliked as a human being but rated really highly as a footballer. I mean, they were reasonably useful, even though they weren't really going to go very far. And they were in the top half of the table, so there'd been no slouches coming into the game. 1 Andy Dawson corner, 1 towering Michael Turner header, and that was enough.
Yeah, he absolutely had the beating of Upson, didn't he? And there was almost like a inevitability to it, which was beautiful. I always thought that what's it, Valeron Barame, I always thought, I don't know, he had a really strange look, like he was auditioning for RuPaul's Catwalk or something. Just he didn't look like a Premier League footballer, although maybe he was just ahead of his time, because that's sort of what Premier League footballers look like now.
Mark Noble didn't look like a Premier League footballer. He certainly didn't when he had his loan spell at Hull City, and I'm not convinced he looks like one now.
No, that's fair enough.
He is sort of God incarnate at West Ham United, because of course he's still in their first team now as the local sort of jellied eel quaffing boy made good. But I've never rated him in the slightest.
What was absolutely ace was on the Monday, the Times supplement the game had the Phil Brown as Paul Heaton.
Oh yeah.
London 0 Hull 4, which was just brilliant. It was this game was also when the Turner for England bandwagon really got going. It wasn't just people pushing a broken down bus. It was like it was motoring. It actually felt as if it might happen. And yeah, City had moved up to the dizzy heights of 3rd at this point. I mean, how ludicrous is that?
And I mean, the side was starting to look quite settled. McShane was now playing at right back instead of Ricketts, who was on the bench. Zayati had settled in because Gardner obviously couldn't keep himself fit. And then it was a fairly regulation-looking side, actually. Marnie and Giovanni with some craft in midfield, with Boateng and Ashby working around them, and steadying the ship, if you like, and Daniel Kuzan and Marlon King up front. We had, and we talked about this a little bit when we went back to the Premier League under Steve Bruce, but we wanted, I mean, at the time, because we didn't really have any, well, there was nothing going wrong at Hull City. Of course, it all imploded completely eventually. But with the exception, with a spot of hindsight, of Marlon King, we had a likeable football team, a likeable football squad, even allowing for some of the highly paid Premier League stars from previous clubs who joined.
The thing is, at this point, did we know the extent of Marlon King's dislikability? I mean, was it the November when he was questioning the price of his watch in a Scarborough casino?
A bit of a set to with Dino afterwards.
So even at this point, I don't think we could even say we had anybody dislikable, because we had no idea of Marlon King's character.
And the incident that led to his incarceration was in London on the night after we'd beaten Middlesbrough, which was at the beginning of December. And you look at the bench. I mean, Richard Garcia, Bernard Mendy, Peter Halmosey, Brian Hughes, Caleb Folan, Sam Ricketts. I mean, some of these guys have been with us for a couple of years anyway. But you felt like there was just something. There was an element of security about Hull City because the personalities were right in the squad. That the blend of flamboyance and characters and slightly more sort of dry and introverted characters were there, wasn't it? It was a proper. It was a proper mixture, a proper squad.
Yeah, it was all still pulling in the same direction as well. The whole club, the whole city was all still going in the right direction. And one of the things I remember about this game, I think I was talking to you about it, Les, is that took us to 20 points, which was already, after 9 games, half of the 40 that you always say you need to get yourselves safe. So what we had another 20 points from 29 games. We weren't safe by that point, were we? We were probably dreaming our dreams, but
yeah, the 20-point mark was certainly on its way, wasn't it?
Because
the following week we played West Brom, also within this sort of week window that we're talking about now, and. The thing, I mean, the West Ham game sort of passed by with great joy because we'd won it, but it wasn't necessarily one that we were going to talk about forever. With West Brom, this is probably the first game of the season where we went in as favourites for a start because of the way we'd played, even though we were expected to implode at any moment. West Brom actually hadn't started overly badly. They were mid-table by the time we went to the Hawthorns. And what a great day that was. You know, we're in the Vine beforehand, getting that brilliant away end at West Brom. And after a workmanlike first half, absolutely ripped them to shreds in the first 20 minutes of the second half.
Yeah, once they'd conceded a pretty comical goal, I mean, you shouldn't be allowed to volley a corner in from 6 yards, should you really? I don't think Zayati could quite believe what on earth was happening.
I think he thought it was in front of his own goal.
It's entirely possible. Kamal Zayati's first goal for City, and memorably, of course, clotheslined in celebration by Daniel Kuzan as he tried to run away. Just got the flat of the fingers right across his throat. And that was 2 minutes into the second half. I loved, even though he scored obviously much more spectacular, memorable goals, I loved Giovanni's goal because it was a diving header. And I was stood at an angle where it was quite obviously the wrong thing to do, to dive and head that particular ball when Marlon King played it over the top of the defence with the outside of his right foot. Clearly Giovanni was going to kill it with his instep, look up, I mean, in the way that Marlon King did when he scored his goal about 4 or 5 minutes later, kill it with his instep, look up at the goalkeeper Scott Carson and slide it past him. But no, Giovanni just launched himself at the ball as it dropped. And I think the reason why it worked so well is because absolutely nobody in the ground, most importantly the goalkeeper, was expecting that, and the keeper simply wasn't ready. He got down and I think there was a mild touch on the back of his little finger as the ball bounced in front of him. But I love that Giovanni goal because it was so un-Giovanni-like, wasn't it? And yet still somehow managed to be spectacular, even though it wasn't the sort of spectacular goal we'd quickly become accustomed to.
It was an amazing header, though, wasn't it? I mean, a diving header, you know, whether your keepers are not ready for it or not, there was a lot of skill involved in there because he did actually set himself. It's one of those that I've seen quite a bit just crop up recently with the 10th anniversary of it happening, and when you look at Giovanni, he gets his body shape right, his eyes on the ball, he even, you know, flicks his neck out, however it is that real footballers do it, and it's just all absolutely beautiful.
But yet, when you watch that over and over again, it does not look like anybody should have a right to head that particular ball.
Granted, it's funny, I mean, City scored some spectacular goals that season, but that was probably the best looking one from a photograph point of view, where you've got Giovanni sort of horizontal heading it in. Going back to Marlon King, that was probably his most influential game for City, wasn't it? He set up Giovanni scoring that. He'd sort of flicked the ball on. And then, how long after was it when
4 minutes.
King just swept the ball in? You know,
and that came from a Mile Hill goal kick, I think, or a punt out the hands, and it just got one flick on, I think, by Kuzan. And King, I mean, West Brom was so dishevelled at this point.
It was King's first touch that really did it. That was I mean, the finish itself was reasonably straightforward, but it was all made by his first touch, which was to just get the ball onto his stronger foot, take the defender completely out, and it all happened so easily for him and so instinctively that, you know, he looked every inch the proper Premier League striker that we needed, who could score goals. As we'd seen 4 minutes earlier, he'd set up one with a really impressive piece of vision, and whatever else he subsequently became, he was absolutely brilliant, wasn't he, in that first half of the season.
Do you remember his celebration? He ran at the City fans shouting, it's over, really, really loudly, over and over again. Do you not remember that? If you watch the footage now, you can lip read it when he runs over to the City fans. I remember we were barracked slightly. Us three, as I recall, that day walked in together, and we were barracked slightly because we were all, or some of us at least, were in amber. Being barracked for being dingles, because obviously amber is similar to old gold according to West Brom fans, and we look like Wolves fans. They were, and I remember seeing a couple of the same supporters on the way out, and they were distinctly quieter. And that's the weird thing. It's another thing, because of course we had form with West Brom. We'd beaten them there the previous season when we both got promoted, and deservedly so. A game that nobody expected us to win, which is why the post-match reaction from the media, at least, was so disappointingly skewed towards a West Brom defeat rather than a Hull City victory, because it was simply nothing that they'd actually planned for. But this time, it was weirdly one-sided that we wondered what we'd done so right since promotion that West Brom had managed to do so wrong, given that they were clearly the best side in the division, who we came up alongside a couple of weeks later via the playoffs the previous season.
It's quite fascinating looking at that team, isn't it? You had Robert Corrin playing for him, but they had some decent players. Scott Carson's a decent keeper. Jonas Olsen's a good player. Borja Valero, who last night was thrown on by Internazionale as Inter was trying to win the Milan derby, and indeed did. You know, he's a player who's greatly respected in Italy, now at Inter and previously for Fiorentina. Yeah, just a fascinating.
Chris Brunt on the bench for them. He, of course, is still playing for West Brom, and we'll play them again this season at some point, won't we? This was the point after that game that we went to 20 points, third in the table, jointly with Chelsea, 3 behind Liverpool, a point ahead of Arsenal, 3 ahead of Villa. Manchester United were in 6. Man City, when you think about the behemoth that they became, they're down in 8th. And of course Tottenham, who we've already beaten, are at the bottom of the table, although a managerial change would soon sort that out. We will obviously talk about this next week when it comes round. But the next 2 games with Chelsea and Manchester United, we know what happened in those games, and we'll talk about that in more detail next week. But coming out of the Hawthorns that day, did you think we'd now peaked and there was going to be a downward spiral because of the fixtures that were coming?
Well, I thought we'd peaked after the Fulham game on the first day of the season. So I think I'd just stopped thinking about what the peak was, and I think I was booking my time off for the Champions League season after.
Fair enough. I was on Match of the Day that night. There was a close-up of City fans doing the CITY City chant on Match of the Day, and I'm on there. And Adrian Chiles was presenting it, and of course he's a West Brom fan. And despite the fact that he's supposed to have an element of impartiality, and I do like Adrian Chiles when he's talking about football, you could tell he was heartbroken at the prospect that his team had lost to Hull City yet again. What, me being on Match of the Day or Adrian Chiles?
Yeah, no, Adrian Chiles. I don't pay my licence fee to watch you, Matt.